Thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar. We're going to wait just 1 minute longer to give everybody a chance to join, and then we'll begin. All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the webinar sponsored by the Society for the Advancement of Violence and Injury Research, or SAVIR. My name is Larry Cook, and I am co-chair of the membership committee for the organization. As you settle in, let me give you just a brief overview of what SAVIR does. SAVIR is a professional organization that provides leadership and fosters excellence in the science of preventing and treating injury and violence. SAVIR is a leader in injury violence prevention research, offering access to expertise in the development of research, program, and policy activities, teaching and mentoring of students and early career researchers, collaboration with practitioners and policymakers with the goal of bridging research, practice, and policy. SAVIR is also a very strong and present advocate for improved resources and funding in the field, and has been focusing on advancing global injury and violence research and increasing membership from global researchers and practitioners. Membership in the organization comes with professional development and networking opportunities through our conferences, committee involvement, and webinars just like this one. Benefits also include a mentoring program designed for students and early career researchers, access to course syllabi, advocacy training materials and webinars, and discounts to our national conferences. Our next conference is scheduled to be in Michigan in 2017. Our benefits also include online access to the journal Injury Prevention, leadership opportunities through standing and expert committees, and access to timely information and position statements in the injury and violence field. If you'd like more information about the organization, including information about our conference in 2017 and member benefits, you can go to our website, which is on the screen. Thank you very much for your time, and Corri, I'll pass the microphone to you now so that you can begin the webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, Larry. While we get our slides loaded up, I want to thank Dr. Sue Gallagher and John Lundell for joining me for this presentation. And to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today, first I am going to talk fairly generally about advocacy and some different types of advocacy. Sue is going to talk very specifically about building relationships, and then John is going to give us a case study, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So the policy committee of SAVIR has done quite a bit of activity focused on federal advocacy, including some training, some Hill visits, but we haven't, we realize, done a lot focused on state advocacy. So today we are focusing very specifically on the state rather than the nation. So injury prevention advocates are excellent advocates because we tend to be passionate and well-spoken about what we do, but I think even more so, we do work that is very relevant to a lot of different types of policies that are of high priorities to states. It's also important that we not only recognize that existing or proposed policies can be beneficial to safety, but many can be detrimental to safety. I think if we look at current firearm laws, if we look at the kind of funny law where the segways were able to get approved in, I think, 11 states to be approved for roadway use, a lot of these things kind of pop up where we have very good evidence that we can share as a resource that can help inform better evidence-based policy making. It's also important to recognize the tie between our general safety culture and policies. So policies establish standards that the public will follow either because of the way the laws require behavior to be amended or because it changes the way we think about how we react in our society. And then we also need to think, we're talking about state today, but it's also very important to think about local policy because often city-level ordinances affecting things like building codes, which affect fire prevention, fall prevention, can be very important for either advancing or hindering safety efforts. So just as some examples of some current hot topics that many states are grappling with right now, always there are transportation committees. Those committees will always be considering or refusing to consider different types of roadway safety laws that deal with occupant restraint, child protection, graduated driver's licensing, cell phone texting, and even different rules and restrictions about what our roadways look like. There's a lot of activity right now focused on adverse child events, and those fall under committees that oversee child protection and abuse prevention. Those policies can affect not only the types of prevention programming, for example, but also just oversight of agencies that deal with these issues, which sometimes can be amended to include a stronger focus on prevention. Substance use prescription drug monitoring may be the hottest topic in many state policies regarding safety right now. Prescription drug monitoring programs, access to naloxone. There's almost a new law somewhere every month, but there has yet to be a strong consistency, especially about the details of those different types of laws. Firearm purchase and carry laws are usually at state level. There's also quite a bit going on in the municipal, local policy making, sports concussions, bullying, etc. So there are really quite a few areas where our injury prevention field overlaps with policy. One nice source that is the link at the bottom that SAVIR not only participated in but actually initiated is a report by Trust for America's Health. It's come out in 2 editions called The Facts Hurt, and it's basically a state-by-state report card looking at whether or not states have evidence-based policies in place. There was a big focus in the most recent one on prescription drug monitoring programs. So, are you allowed to advocate? I will say I have never, there are so many different types of rules and restrictions from different types of agencies, from local to state public health departments to researchers to community professional organizations, but I don't know of a single professional affiliation where you are not allowed to advocate in some way, even if it is only to provide research, expertise, information at the request of a policymaker. And so one of the things that Sue's going to really focus on is if your role as an advocate is limited to providing information as requested, we really want to position ourselves to be the resource to whom that request is made. So as an advocate, you are allowed to provide factual evidence in your area of expertise. You are allowed to express your opinion as a private citizen or as a constituent of an elected official. Many agencies are supportive of creating general policy briefs. If they get into the area of providing information and direction on specific bills that have been introduced, that does cross the line into lobbying. And then one often way to do more advocacy is to create a relationship with your agency's government liaison or government relations office, because most state health departments, for example, have at least one government liaison, and it is their job to be the go-between between the agency, which has restrictions on what it can do legislatively, and the state legislature. So if your government liaison knows what you do, knows what your expertise is, then that's another way that you can become the resource to respond to questions. And we'll have questions at the end. My guess is people will have questions about what is advocacy, what is lobbying, what am I allowed to do and not do, but generally there are things that you are allowed to do. So really the goal is to become a known resource for your state policymakers so that you are the person that they come to. So what are sort of a menu of different ways to advocate? Op-ed pieces are one way to get policy issues not only in the minds of readers of different print material, but the staffers of legislators also read those and usually follow those pretty closely, especially in the news media of their home constituency. So one way is to write one. Often that can be dangerous even if you're writing as a public citizen, if you're taking a strong stance on something your agency might not be comfortable taking a stance on. So you can also encourage someone else to write one, someone who maybe has the authority locally but maybe not the expertise. So you can help them and encourage someone to write a letter that is in an area you want to encourage. Often you can visit with legislators and their staff. If you are officially representing an agency, it is best to go through the government liaison. But when you're a constituent, you are allowed to visit your legislators as a private citizen. One nice way to get attention from a legislator is to give them an award. They often can't come to events, so you have to work through their offices to find the right way to do it. But even if they send a staffer and you can get some pictures in the paper and use that as an opportunity to show them a little bit about what you do in the field, that can be a great entree. And then you can actually just extend extended invitation to legislators or their staff to visit your facility. And sometimes it is as helpful to have staffers, especially as they are the main staffers for the committees you're interested in, to come and visit you. So sometimes you can find out who in the office has a common interest. Sometimes when you are in their district, you can go visit them, or if you live in their district, they will be at home sometimes and they'll be doing a lot of grassroots work to raise awareness among their voters. And then finally, most state legislators, especially around the year that they are going to be elected, have a lot of home district forums and public events. So that is a great place to show up, ask questions. You don't have to identify yourself. So that is really a great way as a public citizen to be able to get your issues in the minds of the elected officials. So knowing that our goal is to become a resource for our state policymakers so that they come to us for our expertise and information and guidance, Sue is going to now focus on building that relationship. So Sue, I'm going to turn over to you, and as I do that, I'll introduce Dr. Sue Gallagher, who is at Tufts University and has decades of experience on the Hill working on advocacy training and is a great resource for us in SAVIR.
Okay, so show screen. Just give me a moment here. I do not know why my screen is not coming up. Let me try something else. Can you see my screen yet?
Yep, we're good with your screen.
Okay, let me just put it in. Okay, so I put this slide back up that Corri did because not only will they come to you for information and guidance, but you want to be a known resource. So when you want to proactively provide information or give input on a relevant policy, they will already know you. And if they already know you, it's more likely that your voice and your position on an issue will be heard. So why is becoming a resource so important? Well, I think most of you are public health people, legislators here from many other disciplines, and general citizens, and this is an opportunity to share your expertise as a voice of science, public health, etc., so that you can influence the way society looks at a public health issue. It's your opportunity to shape the end result to your favor or your specific cause. It's really good if there is an evidence base in the decision making that the legislator or policymaker makes. So Evidence isn't the be-all, end-all in their decision, but it's an important element of their making a decision. And finally, you are going to be a credible person, given your standing if you introduce yourself as part of, a university or, wherever you're from, and you talk about your years of experience as well. So if you don't do it, your position on an issue may not be represented. So it's really important, again, to become a resource. So I'd like to say it's all about building relationships. Just as in any business transaction, relationship building is really critical to success. We do it for research and projects we have at our jobs. And advocacy is about getting your voice heard, and there's a stronger likelihood that it will be heard if you have a relationship. Your legislators receive a huge amount of phone calls and mail from their constituents. Their full agendas limit their ability perhaps to personally read and respond to all. But I'm going to give you some tips on how you can be sure your voice is heard, or the best way to do that. So let me start out by having you think through what are some strategies to get to know your state legislators. Well, the first one is just pick up the phone. When there's something in the news and it resonates with you, call them up. Ask them where they stand on an issue and give them your opinion. Another thing is to make a visit, and that's going to be the bulk of my presentation following this slide. You can offer to provide testimony for a legislative hearing. If they don't already know you, they're always looking for experts, and you can just call and ask them if they need someone. You can write a letter to them following some media report that maybe is a little twisted or convoluted and doesn't really shed light on the issue the way you may like to represent an issue. Providing a photo op is something they really love. Corri already mentioned a way to do this, so I'll skip over that. Inviting their participation in a community injury prevention planning meeting in their district is another way. So right now, sorry about that. So right now in my district where I live in Massachusetts, everything is about opioid, overprescribing opioids and that whole area. And it's like they're clamoring to attend every community meeting in that area. I do think they're sincerely interested in solving the problem, but it's also an opportunity for them too. And finally, as a citizen, you could actually ask them to file a bill. So those are just a few strategies I wanted to mention. So I told you I was going to focus on visiting your state legislators, and I'm going to provide a number of tips to be effective when you do a visit at the state level. So the first thing you have to decide is, who are you going to visit? You all have a district representative. You have, in almost every state, you will have a House and a Senate representative. They work in a different district, so you may want to talk to the representative in your employer's district. A relevant state legislative committee member or chair. So the way a lot of the legislative day-to-day business operates is through committees. And there's one probably that your issue is going to be heard in. And it can vary from state to state. It can also vary in terms of maybe it's the committee that deals with transportation versus the committee that deals with health versus the committee that deals with consumer products. But those committees are very important. And if you have your legislative representative is on that committee, that's actually going to give you even more clout, I think. You might want to visit a representative that you've just read in the newspaper that's very active on the topic, and perhaps they can be a potential champion for an issue you're interested in. And finally, the governor and others create a multitude of task forces or study groups on issues. And again, volunteering, perhaps you've just done a study that has some relevance for a task force. Call them up, send them a message. Say, I just did this and I'd love to come and present it to your task force. So the next thing I have, number 2, is do your homework. I can't stress that enough. You need to do all the behind the scenes work before you're ready to go and do a visit. And you want to be able to see the issue from the perspective of those that you're trying to convince. So you need to understand who you're visiting. What are their interests? What are their priorities? What is their district and their constituents? What do they like? What has been their position on similar issues? And much of this can be found on their personal websites or the legislators' websites, as well as what you read in the paper. Another part of doing your homework is seeing if there's an advocacy group that's already dealing with the issue. You know, there's power in numbers. It's great to align yourself with an advocacy group. They can do a lot of work for you. So consider collaboration, and perhaps they might even want to do a visit with you. So you need to know your issue inside out. Don't just think of all the reasons for something. You got to be thinking about the cons to the issue as well, because the legislator has probably heard all the negative aspects as well as maybe cost issues. You need to think about who the supporters are and who the opposition is, and who has aligned with each side. The issue of costs and whom are these costs going to go to are very important. You hear a lot about that at the federal level, but it also goes on at the state level. And something that can be influential is what's going on in neighboring states. So what is the landscape of neighboring states vis-a-vis that issue? Do they already have passed maybe a bill or are doing something in that area? That's often a good thing for your legislator to know. And one more thing is there support from judges, police, or agency staff and support that a policy can be carried out, monitored, and enforced? Because that's very important as well in sort of tipping people's judgment for your issue. Then you're finally ready to identify your goals and message. You probably have a lot of goals, you know, but you really got to stick to one issue. You don't want to confuse a lot of issues because you risk having nothing be heard. You want to be very clear about what you want to say, what your message is, and it's got to be succinct. I would focus on no more than 2 to 3 points for your message, and please don't use jargon. Put it at the basic public citizen level. Moving on, you need to know a little bit about the characteristics of your state legislature. So every state will have a website. Some have more information than others, but there is a lot there so that you can answer questions like, how often is the legislature in session? That varies from state to state. When is it in session? So some states it's only January through March each year. Are your legislators full or part-time? What is the committee structure? I told you committees were really important, so that's an important one to look at the committee structure on the website. To know what committee oversees your issue. To find out if anyone can attend committee meetings, and do they have open testimony where you can present, you know, maybe something from a study you've done, or you know, something from a program that you're aware of. Then you need to determine when you're going to visit. So it's better if you visit earlier. I was going to say visit early and often, but if you have earlier involvement in the process, I think you're better off. So you determine your visit by what's going on with the legislative calendar, which will be online. if you're going to have an individual meeting with somebody, or are you going to appear at a hearing and do it? Where is the bill in the cycle, the legislative cycle? And is it in one of the states where you go through maybe 3 readings before it actually gets to vote? So if you're in a state where there are a number of readings, to get it to the next reading, there need to be a lot of phone calls about the issue so that it moves on and up the ladder for priorities. If an issue has been in the news, that's an ideal time to visit. And always try to avoid the budget negotiation weeks. It's just a little too crazy for them to pay attention to much at all. So, develop your speaking strategy for a visit. This is very important. You want to be brief, and you should plan on 5 to 10 minutes. So, a little more than a soundbite, but not that much more. You want to introduce yourself either through your organization or just as a private citizen. You want to mention the issue and any gaps there are in state policy related to the issue. So it's good to have some compelling data, but you need to keep it at a minimum and not overwhelm with numbers and statistics. You need to know that policy, unfortunately, is not totally data-driven, but local data is important in presenting your case for injury prevention. But be minimum on the data. They can always ask for more, or you can provide more. Then you need to tell your legislator how they can help. What is your ask going to be? And there could be a whole, almost a whole webinar just on doing an ask. But you need to think, what is it you're asking for? How can they help you? Let them know that what the outcome or consequences are of taking action, but also of not taking action. How is that going to affect their constituents, their district? And so getting to the next point, what are the benefits to constituents or the legislator themselves personally? Few additions to your speaking strategy are if you can add a story to personalize your message and have some emotional appeal, that's really important. They're never going to remember data, but they will remember a story. End your visit by repeating your ask, offering to be a resource, and the #1 prop you can leave is your business card. That's very important. And then leave any relevant information. If you do leave information, remember they don't have a lot of room for filing information. Leave a brief 1-pager with your contact information on it. And finally, you want to follow up by writing a thank you note, sending information that the legislator may have requested during the visit, and keep in touch. Ask about the status of an issue or a new one. You provide updates on an issue as well. So building a relationship, it's not a one-time thing. They need to repeatedly hear from you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Lundell, who will be giving a case example from a state perspective. John? John? John, are you there?
Let me text him. See if he's having some issues.
Okay, John's coming on board now, I think. John?
Yep. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, now,
Take over the screen. You should have a button that you can take over the screen.
yep. Sorry. Okay. You know, it's amazing how the microphone worked fine until on the test, and then you try it now. So, okay, well, thank you very much. Again, it's a pleasure to follow up with Sue and Corri, and absolutely everything that they both reported is so true on this case study that I wanted to speak a little bit about. For seemingly ages, nearly a decade, the University of Iowa Injury Center has been involved in helping in a coalition to strengthen our graduated driver's license law for young drivers. Years ago, Iowa was one of the very first states to adopt a GDL law, and we were one of the leaders in the nation, in fact. But then the other states caught up, and research came out on how the GDL's laws should be strengthened, and we quickly fell behind in terms of the components of our GDL being among one of the more weaker states. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, our lesson in being strategic, certainly patient, and certainly persistent, and the value of partnering in this arena.
And I'm going to just let you know that we actually don't see your slides.
You don't see our slides.
Could they be on maybe a different of the split screens?
No, it's on both of my screens. Let me.
Did you see did you accept control? There we go. We're good now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Corri. So yeah, so there's the screen that I was just speaking on top of. Okay, so well, it feels like we've been involved this long. It's a little bit after this slide was taken that we got involved in the young driver research area. And that leads to this slide where I just wanted to state that the center here has had a long history of being involved on the research side of young driver safety, led by Corri and several of our colleagues here. Nearly as long as I've been involved, which is over 20 years, our center has always had a focus of looking at driving safety and particularly focusing on young drivers. So just sort of go through the chronology here. In February of 2006, Corri and Dr. Craig Zwirling, the previous center director, and I authored this op-ed piece that was published in our local newspaper in Iowa City, and this was sort of the launching point of where we started to identify the need to strengthen Iowa's GDL law and started to partner with particularly Blank Children's Hospital. That's a private children's hospital in Des Moines, Iowa, who has been our very strong advocacy partner for years. We've worked with them on strengthening Iowa's child passenger safety law. In fact, we've been successful 3 different times in strengthening the CPS law in Iowa, and it couldn't have been done without our partners at Blank Children's Hospital, and you'll see that as I progress through. So in the spring of 2006, the NCIPC sent out an invitation for applications from states that wanted to be a part of a teen driving roundtable that was going to occur in June in Atlanta. And since we decided we were ready to move forward on this topic, we submitted an application, and it was certainly all the key partners were represented from our state: Public Health, Transportation, the Highway Patrol, Blank Children's Hospital, the Injury Free Coalition that was at Blank, and our center. And you can see photos of those folks there. There we learned a great deal from the other states that were invited and of how they were addressing this issue, and it really helped launch our efforts and brought us together. Then, as many states were doing across the nation about that same time, the Iowa Department of Transportation was putting together their CSP, their Comprehensive Safety Plan. And that started with a large group of large meeting in Ames, Iowa, where the DOT is, a room full of mostly engineers, to tell you the truth. There was a few from public health and a few from public safety, but being it's the DOT, there were a lot of engineers in the room. But after a long day of establishing priorities, I was really impressed and pleased that the number one legislative policy issue was to strengthen Iowa's graduated driver's license. So now we had a lot of momentum from the state DOT to tackle this topic. We started working with the DOT and our partners at Blank and others, Brain Injury Association and so forth, and made some inroads each session. The Iowa legislature meets from January into May each year, and so in the 07 and 08 session, we made some attempts and attended some meetings back in the districts of the key legislators, and we started to raise the issue, but you have to be patient, and it's not something you're going to accomplish in 1 year. So then in 2009, again, we were blessed that the NCIPC identified our state as one of the states that was sort of at the tipping point in strengthening their GDL law, which was also a priority for the CDC. And so they blessed us with providing us funding through Dr. Rob Foss, who's, as you can see, is the director of the study of young drivers at UNC Chapel Hill. And Rob, if you know Rob, he is certainly a very eloquent speaker on this topic and a highly published researcher. So he spent a great deal of time in our state going back and forth and mobilizing meetings and educating us and helping us work through a very strategic process of trying to improve our law through the legislative process. And this is just one of many pictures of meetings that we had to do that. Here we were breaking out the Iowa Senate and House districts and tried to color code legislators' districts that were probably more favorable towards GDL than others. This is one of the handouts that we put together again with Blank Children's Hospital that was very useful, and as Sue mentioned, having those one-pagers to hand out. So then we decided as a group that we needed to have good science to try and strengthen our argument when we're talking to our legislators, to back it up with science that represents what the residents of Iowa, how they feel. So with some funding from the DOT, we were able to contract with a telephone survey company actually out of Kansas to do a very comprehensive and scientifically rigid and structured telephone survey. And Iowa has 99 counties, and we ended up, we were able to target households that had either 16 or 17-year-old teens in them. So we had a sample size of 1,065 phone calls. So over 1,000 phone calls, and it was stratified by rural-urban profile of the state. We asked a number of questions about your opinion as a parent of a 16 or 17-year-old, your opinion on whether Iowa should have a passenger limitation, nighttime driving limitation, instructional permit, all the typical characteristics of a GDL law. We asked their opinions of these parents on, and it was overwhelmingly positive. And very little difference between rural and urban in our state. Really across the board, there was strong support for all the components of the GDL law that we were proposing to strengthen. Slightly less support on the passenger restriction in rural areas, and I think that just had to do with the driving distance to schools in rural areas and wanting to partner up and share a ride to those rural schools. But so we felt pretty good that we had real science that backed up what we were trying to advocate for in terms of strengthening our law. So then in the 2010 session, we took that to it. One of the things we did here in this slide, we organized a meeting locally with our legislators. In this picture, that's me with the plaid shirt. But the other three people, the two other males and the lady in sort of the aqua shirt, are legislators, and these other two are staff from Blank Children's Hospital. And then Lisa Roth from our center was taking the picture. We organized sort of a private meeting at the public library locally here to strategize. Now that we had this results of the survey, who to target within the legislature. There's a senator there and two House of Representatives in the audience, and it was very helpful in identifying key partners on who we would target in terms of moving this legislation forward. Multiple times, I could fill up several screens. Every year I would go to the Hill and pay visits, and they like to get their pictures taken, and so do I. So I've got a whole album full of pictures. But here's Ginger Yang. She was part of this group when she was with here at the University of Iowa, involved in some of that research on young drivers. So the 2010 session, we felt pretty good going into that. We had committee bills drafted in both the House and the Senate. The Senate bill passed the subcommittee. It passed the Transportation Committee. And then it passed the entire Senate, 47-1. And this was all within the first couple weeks of the session. And so we were extremely ecstatic that we thought we had the momentum to finally pass an improved GDL bill. However, then we went over to the other side, and oftentimes, no different at the federal level, the House is a little more difficult. But in the House, it passed out of the House subcommittee. It passed the Transportation Committee 17-4. But that's where it stalled. It was never, after that, it was never put on the House debate calendar for the full House to take it up on the floor. And the Des Moines Register, the state's primary newspaper, wrote a negative editorial that was very unfortunate about the proposed GDL strengthening. We started hearing issues about passenger limitation, in terms of sports, after-school activities of sports, and the need for carpooling. The nighttime limitation, they talked about, oh, my kid can't go on a late-night movie date, that passed the nighttime passenger restriction and so forth, or driving restriction. There was just a lot of arguments that we had good rebuttals to, but just kept surfacing. They started calling it a curfew. It's no such thing as a curfew. It just restricts your youngsters' ability to drive after a certain time at night. So unfortunately, we stumbled in 2010 and did not have the success that we started out with. 11 was no different. 12, there's a picture of Corri and Dan McGehee and us, and we went back to the legislature, and that picture even got into the paper about us meeting with the researchers on GDL. But the most important aspect that happened was when, again, the CDC graciously identified us for support of hosting a GDL framing workshop. A workshop that we invited about 100 guests from across the state, from all the various agencies and partnership groups that have any involvement whatsoever in this issue. We invited them to come to Iowa City. And in January, they paid for Dr. Lynn Davey to come. Arlene Greenspan and several from the CDC were there as well. Rob Foss came back for it. And we spent a day as a group talking about the GDL and really being educated on how to frame that message that, as Sue mentioned, is so important, into a very short nugget of information, and how to identify the issues and how to come up with responses to concerns that the legislators have, and then identifying the next steps for how we're going to go forward with this new training that we were able to receive from the CDC. That was in January, and lo and behold, success. We finally, woohoo! And it wasn't, you never get as much as you want, but a bill was passed effective in 2014. The instruction, anyone getting an intermediate license would first be required to have an instructional permit for 12 months. And the reason that was important is, we have 4 different seasons of weather in Iowa, and the previous restriction was just 6 months of an instructional permit. Well, under the previous restriction, you could drive with your parent during the spring and summer months and never have any experience driving in the winter. So by having a 12-month instructional permit, it helped ensure that the youth was having experience driving in all 4 seasons in Iowa, which is very important. We were able to get a passenger restriction for the first 6 months, but there were a couple caveats to that. The waiver was allowed for siblings. So if you had a brother or a sister, you could allow, they could be transported with you, but otherwise anyone under 18 was not permitted. The other unusual aspect of the passenger restriction was they allowed a parent to sign a waiver if they wanted to allow their youth to drive the first 6 months with a passenger. If you had the signature of your parent, that restriction could be waived. And it's amazing how many parents have been willing to sign that waiver. So it's not as strong as we'd like, but it certainly was more effective than what we'd had before. The nighttime driving restriction, unfortunately, remained at 12:30 in the morning. We would have liked to have seen it be much sooner than that. The crash statistics show that you should start it at 9 or 10 p.m., but ours remained at 12:30. But at least we achieved several of the points that we had wanted to. So in closing, I just wanted to mention the valuable partners that we would not have been able to do this. There were several financial contributors. The Iowa chapter of the AAP, American Association of Pediatrics, helped sponsor. We did a road tour of press events across the state where we would identify a parent that had a child that was involved in a crash to be the spokesperson, and when we held news conferences across the state, and they supported that effort. State Farm Insurance was a huge supporter. We used their meeting facility, and they helped pay for printing of a lot of the materials. The Iowa DOT paid for that telephone survey. I mentioned all the great support that we had from the CDC. Blank Children's Hospital in time and materials, invaluable, and of course we were part of that. And then we had many other supporters that also were with us along the way, the Brain Injury Association, Department of Education, and so forth. So very quickly there, I kind of blew through that, but I wanted to leave time for questions. It was a lot. Again, I think I just closed by saying you need to be persistent, patient, and work with your partners to make working with your legislature in these initiatives. So I will now open it up to questions for any of us.
So for the audience, the system does not allow general speaking. So if you have questions, they need to be typed into the message box on the window of the meeting organizer, which is the GoToWebinar at the bottom. If that system doesn't work well for you, you are welcome to email them to me. So you can see my name under who's talking, and it's my name with dashes between each thing and then at uiowa.edu. And I will say there was a huge amount of information we wanted to include but didn't have time to include. So we're hoping some of that other stuff, because there's so much to do, so many fun things to do in this arena, hope some of that comes up. So please feel free to start typing your questions. I hear some typing. And I'm guessing I'll be able to see those. If you send it to the organizer only, so try to send it to organizer and panelists or to everybody. And hopefully we'll get them all that way. So while we're waiting for a question to come in, I'll answer a question that Sue talked about a little bit, which is how do you do your homework to find out what your legislators are interested in? And there's a lot of information online. Probably the first place I would recommend going is looking at their voting record. So all of that is public information. You can look up what they have voted for and against. You can also look up what bills they've sponsored, and especially for long-standing legislators, they should have a good track record of sponsoring bills. If they're more junior, it's a little bit hard to tell, but it's also true that if you find that your legislator does not have a good track record of introducing bills, they might not be the most effective person to work with. Another place to look is in the committee rosters. So usually there are efforts to align legislators to the committees that they're most interested in. And maybe I'll ask Sue and John if you guys have any other tips about that. Okay, someone asked about whether or not that includes their personal interest, and absolutely. One of the entrees, there are just statistically going to be a lot of legislators who have personal stories related to violence and injury. So they often don't know that there is a whole field working to prevent injuries. And, I think it needs to be handled very delicately, but, if you can find personal stories and can bring them positive messages about things to do after they have had appropriate time to, if it's a very close event, to give them some time to grieve. For example, Vice President Joe Biden lost a son, I believe, to a car crash. And I know that there have been visits, there have been, efforts to speak with him about being a stronger champion for that. And I think it's something that he does personally hold very dear and is a strong, quiet advocate for that cause.
And you oftentimes don't know. Sometimes it's hard to identify who those advocates are. Some that you expect would be on a particular issue, like in our case on the GDL, there was one or two legislators that were former Iowa Highway Patrol officers, and we thought that was going to be a slam dunk, and turns out that they were resistant to this for personal reasons that in terms of personal liberty and that type of argument that comes up on so many of these issues. On the other hand, there were a few legislators that felt very strongly, very conservatively on other issues that came out in favor of this. So until you start talking to them, it's oftentimes hard to predict how they may fall on a particular issue.
So we have a question. We anticipated this question because it is such a tough line. So it's from an injury epidemiologist at a State Department of Public Health. And are you allowed to visit your state rep to offer to be an injury data resource where you would be using data from the state health department? And if you are planning to provide data that is specifically owned by your health department, then you actually are an agent of that department at that time. So probably what I would recommend to move forward with this is to meet with your government liaison and see if they would support you going to visit to talk about the great work that the state health department does and to be a resource for that person. Now, it's all over the board about whether or not they'll say yes, but I will say that building a relationship over time so that your government liaison trusts you to be a good steward for the agency, the doors will open, because they're often far too busy, and when there are people in the agency that can help them accomplish their mission, they're often very grateful for that. But you do have to build a relationship with some trust. It's a commitment to build it with the government liaison. Sue, I'm going to throw this one to you to give us.
So I worked in a state health agency and did some injury epidemiology for a while, and it may be that they have a position that you're not allowed to proactively provide data, but if the legislator gets in touch with you, then you can provide data. So how does that work? Well, that's why you talk to advocacy groups, because the advocacy group can do a lot of things that you can't. So they could ask the question of the legislator, who would then filter it to the state health department, so you in the long run would be the person that provides the data. And that's some of the kind of manipulations you might have to do if you're a state employee. But it is going to vary from state to state. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's my take on it. You can always figure out a way to do it.
So anyway, type away if you want us to expand on that. Becky Turpin asked another good question about the ask. And so legislators are used to people coming through the doors, staffers are used to it, they're kind of waiting for an ask. And so if really what you're doing is visiting them to provide the evidence, really the ask is, I really want to see evidence-based policy that can have a huge impact on the issue that you're talking about. Because the moment that you say, I want you to sign on to Bill X, that does become lobbying. I think you can say, I am not allowed to lobby. But at the moment, there are very important policy decisions to be made about this issue, and my ask is that you integrate this information into your decision making. Also, something that I just thought of, it's really, really good to thank them if they have been an advocate in any way for your cause, and that's also part of your doing the homework. If they voted yes on a bill that's been turned down 5 times, make sure you thank them for that support, and then maybe say, I've noticed the voting record on this topic is very favorable. I want to thank you for your support. My ask is to continue working in support of this area, and to make sure you know that we are a resource here for you. John or Sue, you want to add to that?
I think pretty much you covered it. I think maybe the whole I'm kind of getting federal and state kind of stuff mixed up. But if there's some if there's going to be, say, a specific hearing on something that's of interest to you, I think it's perfectly fine for you to have an ask like, would you attend the hearing or have somebody attend the hearing, because I'm interested in the evidence base on this topic. So that's just another example. Would you agree, Corri, you can do that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we were asked to, Dan McGeehee, one of the researchers affiliated with our center, was asked to attend a joint meeting of the transportation committees of the House and the Senate to provide his research on young drivers, and he uses in-vehicle cameras. And but that was specifically at the request of the committees to come and present.
So we have a question about how to determine which 2 or 3 talking points to bring with you to the legislators. Sue, do you want to take that one?
Well, you want to find out as much as you can about the legislator to see what's going to most spark their interest and what maybe is going to be most relevant to their constituents. If the legislator has come out publicly for or against something, you can have a talking point be to support what he's doing and thank you, he or she. But you might also want to have the talking point be there's a lot of things that get said in the paper that sometimes aren't true or there's no scientific basis to it. So if there's a con to something that's being proposed, you might want to point out what the true facts are about the particular area or thing that, why people are opposed. So John, when he was saying, one of the reasons the bill got voted down early on was there was some miscommunication or misunderstanding about what the bill really said in terms of what the team could do or not do. I think that's something that you pointed out, John.
Yes. There's always misperceptions on different aspects of the bill, in this case calling it a curfew and so forth and so on, and they almost turn into sound bites that get repeated, and so that's a key talking point to refute those.
I think another take on this question is, how do you identify 2 or 3 talking points when you know your legislator is not in support of the more pro-safety injury prevention approach? And there, it's a little bit trickier, but the goal is to find where is the common ground, because there almost always will be some movement in the evidence. And I will say another part of that is never assume that a legislator is going to care about your evidence or even give it any credence. In Iowa, we often go with the rural populations. What kinds of injuries stand out in rural populations? Go in saying, start with, we all want to have, the healthiest, safest communities for our rural populations. If the same argument goes, if you're in a metropolitan area, we all want to have the safest city that we can. So it's really figuring out where they are on the spectrum of the opinions and what resonates with them and going in that way.
But I mean, even if they're opposed, you still want to go on record that you don't feel the same way they do.
Yeah.
That's important that they hear from the other side.
And to find, identify those partners that share your view, and that your partners may have a different relationship with that particular legislator than you do. So if the partner can mention what you're trying to promote, that's a sort of a way to triangulate and approach it that way.
And with sort of the opponents, it's important to know how strongly they're opposed to what you want, because the reality of how these bills come out of committee is a little disturbing in how much is bargaining and give and take. And so we have been effective in getting legislators to not sacrifice our bill that we're interested in on behalf of another. So it's kind of a subtle thing, because you can't just go in there and say, well, don't vote, don't not vote on this one because you want someone else to vote yes on yours. But sometimes the ask is really, we would, even if we can't agree on exactly where you stand on this issue, at least please consider the evidence and, don't be such a proponent, or don't be so strongly against it. You'd have to word it better. Sorry, it's not coming out right. But
and always be polite.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? I don't know, Sue or John, do you have questions that you want to spontaneously answer of your own?
Well, I wanted to, my one piece of advice is, you just got to go ahead and do it. Once you do it, you start getting comfortable with it. And the other thing is, you'll be surprised at pretty much, they're really happy to hear you and to find out what a constituent is thinking. So, we kind of build these barriers in our mind, but it's really, once you do it, you kind of get over the hump. And when I've taken students before, they're always surprised at how welcoming the legislator or the legislative assistant is.
Yeah, for those in agencies that have access to students, this is a great process to get students involved in. And one way that is visiting with you or with someone, but another way is to bring students or send students to the local meetings and have them take their primary interest and ask a question about where the member stands on that question.
If you have any anxiety, again, go with a partner. Identify someone that's on the same issue with you, and take them along and go together.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions coming in. We wanted to schedule plenty of time for discussion. We are available for more directed individual questions if anyone has an interest, but if we're not going to have any more questions coming in the chat box, then I think we can probably close.
Right, and I don't know if you already mentioned, Corri, and I missed it, but the webinar will be eventually will be posted on the SAVIR website.
Yes, thank you. I had not mentioned that in the slides as well. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your attendance. And if you're interested in this issue, you can also join the SAVIR Policy Committee.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.